Hi everyone, welcome back to Textual Criticism. We're looking at the sources for the Hebrew Bible, continuing this series with the Masoretic text. We're on part 4, and we're looking specifically today at the third period of transmission. So let's get into it. We're going to look at this third period of transmission, the sources that are involved in it, and the character of the third period. So, as by way of review, the first period consisted of essentially the Second Temple period. We don't know when it began precisely during the Second Temple period, but it runs through the destruction of the Second Temple in 70 CE. And from 70 CE into the 8th century is roughly the second period of transmission for the Masoretic text. And then today we're going to be talking about the last section, the 8th century through the end of the Middle Ages, roughly the middle of the second millennium CE. So, the sources for the third period, you have them divided essentially into two periods. The pre-1100 period, which are considered the early sources, and then the later, the 11 to approximately 1500 sources. So, the earlier sources tend to be more reliable, but as time goes by, these texts become more and more standardized. Codex in Cairo, the Aleppo Codex, and so on. We'll talk about those tomorrow in a bit more detail. So what is the character of the third period? And this is where I want to spend some time today. By this point, the Masoretic text is almost completely standardized. You have additional elements that have been added to the text, and they become finalized during this period. So the Masorah, the vocalization, the cantillation marks, and the divisions in the text. And so let's take a look at each of these. By way of review, we've talked about the Masorah a number of times, but the Masoretic text is given its name from the Masorah that was eventually transmitted with the Hebrew text. Its primary development came in the 10th century with the Ben Asher family. This is the book of Joshua, and you notice here highlighted in yellow, this is the main Hebrew text that was transmitted. But then over here in the margin and just underneath of the main body text is the Masorah. So these are the notes, the references that the Masoretes transmitted along with the consonantal text, and eventually its pointings that we're going to talk about today. But these are the notes that were transmitted alongside and below. Now, vocalization, and this is something that's important for us to realize. The vocalization was a system of marks and pointing that made it clear which words were intended by the consonants and how they were to be pronounced. So if you remember, the Hebrew text was consonantal in the Proto-Masoretic period and through most of its transmission. But during this period in particular, the vocalization, these points, these marks, were added around the consonantal text in a way that was systematized. And these indicated how the Masoretes were how they understood the individual words. So let's take a look at an example here. So if you look at these consonants, Dalet, Bet, Resh, these are the consonants. But and the points that you see in addition are the vowel points. So this is an I vowel. This is a long E vowel. These are both long A vowels. That's a long A and a short A. These are two short E's. That's a long O and a short E. So these are points you can see they're added around the consonants, right? Now you notice the consonants are the same all the way through. Now depending on the vowels that you add, you can change the meaning of the word in its entirety. So for example, diber is he said. Davar is a word, the noun. Davar is he said. This is a different verbal form, a different binyan. Dever, which is pestilence, the noun for pestilence, and then dover, which is the word for pasture. So you can see, based on the variation in the vowel pointing, this can mean very different words. But I want to bring home the point, no pun intended, that these vowel points can change the meaning of the word, and so by adding these points, it made it clear to the reader what was being intended by the text. Cantillation marks. These are additional marks that were also added to the text. They're not vowels. They denote several things. One, where the stress goes on the syllable. 2, they show syntactical relationships between the various words and phrases. And then 3, they give musical information. So I'll show you here in just a second. So if you look, here's another view close up of the text. And if you look here, these are vowel sounds here, here, here. But this little /, that's a cantillation mark. This one here is a cantillation mark. This is a cantillation mark. Here's another one here, cantillation mark here. Notice here, here, here. This is a cantillation mark. This one is. So these are additional marks that are not part of the vowels, and they show you where the stress is. So for here, v, ki, na would be the syllable that has the stress because that's where the cantillation mark is. The mo na is na, that's where the stress would be here. The da would be where the stress is here. The kedesh, so notice the accent would be back here. Chatzor, the accent would be here. Anyway, so they show syllable stress. They also show relationships of words. So for example, here, these two syllable or cantillation marks, notice how they kind of point toward each other. That means that these go together. Same thing here. These two go together syntactically. So they show relationships, how they understood these words to go together. And then finally, they give musical information. So I can't believe I'm getting ready to say this, but I studied cantillation marks for a while and learned to sing some of them. So you actually sing the stress. You sing the cantillation mark. So in Genesis 1, you would sing Bereshit bara Elohim et hashamayim ve'et haaretz, and those cantillation marks tell you where you should put the stress and what notes you should sing based on those marks. So divisions in the text, without going into a whole lot of detail here to be somewhat confusing, even though it may have already happened, there were divisions that were placed in the text by the Masoretes specifically to show the beginning of a new topic, to divide that new topic into subtopics, and then to denote individual verses. Now, in the 13th century, chapters were added in England but in a manuscript of the Latin Vulgate, and these chapters were brought over in the transmission of the text later on. But this is an interpretive thing. Of course, all of these things are interpretive. These are things added to the consonantal text to make more sense. But again, they're interpretive, and certainly chapter division was interpretive. So this is not something that was there all along. So keep that in mind as a text critic, that the chapter divisions were not added until much later. Okay, tomorrow what we're going to do is look in particular at some of the more important medieval manuscripts, the sources for the Masoretic tradition, and try to give them a bit of a description so that you can understand when we actually go to practice textual criticism, you understand some of the sources in a bit more detail. Okay, see you tomorrow.